I, 32F, never thought I'd find myself in such a complicated family situation at this stage of my life. My mother passed away a few years ago, leaving a huge void in our family. My father, who was devastated by the loss, surprised us all when he announced his intention to remarry last year. While I wanted to be supportive of his decision, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease about the whole situation. Enter my new stepmother, a woman just a few years older than me. From the moment we met, I could sense that she had a strong, dominant personality. She seemed to have a clear idea of how she wanted our family to function, and it didn't take long for her to start implementing changes in our household. At first, I tried my best to adapt to the new dynamics. I understood that my father was trying to move on and find happiness again, and I didn't want to be an obstacle in his path. However, as time went on, I found myself increasingly at odds with my stepmother. It started with small things, like her rearranging the furniture in the house or changing our long-standing family traditions. She seemed to have a way of doing things that was completely different from what we were used to, and she was not open to any suggestions or compromises. As the weeks turned into months, the tension between us grew. My stepmother began to make comments about my lifestyle choices, my career, and even my personal relationships. She seemed to have an opinion on everything, and she was not afraid to voice her disapproval. One of the most challenging aspects of this situation was how it affected my relationship with my brother, who was a few years younger than me. We had always been close, but my stepmother seemed determined to drive a wedge between us. She would often make snide remarks about how I was a bad influence on him, or how I wasn't setting a good example as an older sister. At first, my brother tried to stay neutral and avoid getting caught in the middle of our conflicts. However, as time went on, I could sense him pulling away from me. He started spending more time with our stepmother, joining her on shopping trips and outings that I was not invited to. I tried to talk to my father about the situation, but he seemed hesitant to get involved. He would always say that he wanted us all to get along, but he never actually took any steps to address the issues at hand. I could tell that he was torn between his loyalty to his new wife and his love for his children, and it broke my heart to see him struggling like this. As the months turned into a year, I found myself growing more and more isolated within my own family. My stepmother's influence had spread to every corner of our lives, and I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying not to say or do anything that would upset her. The final straw came on my birthday. I had planned a small dinner with just my father and brother, hoping to spend some quality time together like we used to. However, when I arrived at the restaurant, I found my stepmother there waiting for us. She had apparently decided to join us at the last minute, without even bothering to ask if it was okay with me. Throughout the entire meal, she dominated the conversation, talking about her own life and interests while barely acknowledging my presence. I could see my brother growing uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything. My father, as usual, seemed oblivious to the tension in the room. By the end of the evening, I was fighting back tears. I felt so betrayed, so utterly alone in my own family. I knew that something had to change, but I had no idea where to even begin. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing with thoughts and emotions. I realized that I had been so focused on trying to keep the peace and avoid conflict that I had lost sight of my own needs and desires. I had allowed my stepmother to take over every aspect of my life, and in the process, I had lost touch with the person I used to be. I knew that I couldn't continue living like this. I needed to find a way to assert myself, to reclaim my place in the family and in my own life. But how could I do that without causing even more damage to our already fragile relationships? As I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer be a passive observer in my own life. I would find a way to stand up for myself, to make my voice heard, no matter how difficult it might be. I owed it to myself and to the memory of my mother, to fight for the family that we had once been. Little did I know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change all of our lives forever. But in that moment, all I knew was that I had to try. I had to find a way to be true to myself, even if it meant risking everything I held dear. Update 1. I made the decision to leave my father's house and the suffocating presence of my stepmother. I had reached a point where I couldn't take it anymore, the constant criticism, the feeling of being an outsider in my own home, and the growing distance between my brother and me. I still remember the day I left. I had been planning it for a while, quietly packing my essentials and searching for a place to stay. I knew I couldn't afford to rent my own apartment, not with my current financial situation. That's when I thought of my brother. Despite the strain that my stepmother had put on our relationship, I knew that my brother still cared for me. We had grown up together, shared countless memories, and had always been there for each other. I hesitated at first, not wanting to burden him with my problems, but I felt like I had no other choice. So, on a chilly Wednesday evening, I showed up at his doorstep with a suitcase and a heavy heart. When he opened the door, I could see the surprise and concern in his eyes. I couldn't stay there anymore, I told him, my voice trembling. I just couldn't. Without a word, he stepped aside and let me in. That night, as we sat on his couch and talked for hours, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. My brother listened patiently as I poured out all my frustrations and fears, offering words of comfort and understanding. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine at my brother's place. It was a small apartment, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the tension and hostility I had left behind. My brother and I started spending more time together, cooking meals, watching movies, and just enjoying each other's company. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were times when the guilt and sadness would creep up on me, making me question my decision to leave. I missed my father terribly, and I worried about how he was coping with everything. But every time I thought about going back, I remembered the way my stepmother had made me feel small, insignificant, and unwanted, and I knew I couldn't put myself through that again. Then, about a week after I had left, something unexpected happened. My father called me. I stared at my phone for a long moment before answering, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I said tentatively. "Hi, sweetheart," my father's voice came through the line, sounding tired and strained. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." We talked for a while, mostly about superficial things, the weather, my job, his work. But then, just before we said goodbye, he said something that caught me off guard. "I miss you," he said softly. "I know things have been difficult, and I'm sorry for not being there for you the way I should have been." I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I processed his words. It was the first time he had acknowledged the problems in our family, the first time he had apologized for his role in it all. I knew that it wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, my father and I started talking more regularly. He would call me every few days, just to check in and see how I was doing. At first, our conversations were tentative and awkward, both of us tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. But gradually, we started opening up more, sharing our thoughts and feelings about the situation. I learned that my father had been doing a lot of soul-searching since I left. He had started to realize how much he had let my stepmother control and manipulate our family dynamic, and he was beginning to question whether he had made the right choices. He told me that he loved me and my brother more than anything, and that he wanted to find a way to make things right. It wasn't easy, of course. There were still a lot of hurt feelings and unresolved issues between us. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a glimmer of hope for our relationship. I knew that it would take time and effort to rebuild what had been broken, but I was willing to try. As for my stepmother, I learned from my brother that she had been furious when she found out I had left. She had apparently gone on a rampage, blaming everyone but herself for the situation. My father had finally put his foot down and told her that he wouldn't tolerate her behavior anymore, which had led to a huge argument between them. I didn't know what the future held for our family, but I knew that I had made the right decision for myself. I had taken a stand for my own happiness and well-being, and that was something to be proud of. And with my brother by my side and my father starting to come around, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to be a family again, not the perfect, idealized version I had once imagined, but a real, messy, loving one that we could all be a part of. Update 2. It's been 6 months since I left my father's house and moved in with my brother. In that time, my life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. The decision to leave was one of the hardest I've ever made, but it was also the most necessary. I needed space to heal, to rediscover myself, and to figure out what I wanted my future to look like. Living with my brother has been a blessing. We've always been close, but the past few months have brought us even closer together. He's been my rock, my confidant, and my biggest supporter. Together, we've been working on rebuilding our relationship and creating a new dynamic, one that's based on mutual respect, understanding, and love. But the biggest surprise came just a few weeks ago, when my father called me with some unexpected news. "Your stepmother and I are getting a divorce," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I realized that I couldn't keep living like this, not if it meant losing my children. I was stunned. I had never imagined that my father would actually leave his wife, not after everything that had happened. But as he explained the situation to me, I began to understand. He had been doing a lot of soul-searching since I left, and he had come to the conclusion that his marriage was toxic, not just for me and my brother, but for him as well. "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through," he told me, his voice breaking. "I should have been there for you, should have stood up for you. I failed you as a father, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Hearing those words from my father was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For so long, I had felt like I was alone in my struggle, like no one understood what I was going through. But now, I realized that my father had been going through his own journey, one that had led him to the same conclusion as me. Over the next few weeks, my father and I talked almost every day. We had a lot of catching up to do, a lot of healing to work through. But with each conversation, I could feel the pieces of our relationship starting to come back together. It wasn't easy, and there were still a lot of hurt feelings and unresolved issues between us. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same team, like we were working towards a common goal of rebuilding our family. One day, about a month after my father had told me about the divorce, I got a call from my brother. "Dad's moving out of the house this weekend," he said. "He's getting his own place. I think it's time for you to come home." I hesitated at first. The thought of going back to that house, with all its painful memories and associations, was daunting. But as I talked it over with my brother and my father, I realized that it was the right thing to do. If we were going to rebuild our family, we needed to do it together, in the place where we had all grown up. So, on a sunny Saturday morning, I packed up my things and headed back to my childhood home. As I walked through the front door, I was struck by how different everything felt. The house was quieter, emptier, but also lighter, somehow. It was as if a heavy cloud had lifted, and we could finally breathe again. My father was there waiting for me, his eyes filled with tears as he pulled me into a tight hug. "Welcome home, sweetheart," he whispered. "I've missed you so much." Over the next few days, my father, brother, and I worked on turning the house back into a home. We rearranged furniture, put up new pictures, and filled the space with laughter and love. It wasn't always easy, there were still moments of tension and discomfort, times when old wounds would resurface. But we were committed to working through it together, to creating a new chapter in our family's story. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, my father raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "To second chances, and to the love that binds us together." As I clinked my glass against his, I felt a sense of hope and possibility that I hadn't felt in years. Our family had been through so much: the loss of my mother, the turmoil of my father's remarriage, the pain of my own journey. But we had survived it all, and we had come out stronger on the other side. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead. Healing takes time, and rebuilding trust is a slow and delicate process. But I also knew that we had the most important thing of all, each other. And with that love and support, I believed that we could face anything that came our way. As I looked around the table at my father and brother, I felt a deep sense of gratitude and love. We were a family again, not the perfect, idealized version I had once imagined, but a real, messy, beautiful one that had been through the fire and emerged stronger and more united than ever before. And that, I knew, was worth everything.